Hello, my name is Amy Natsky. Welcome to my channel. Today I'll continue on in my series on Christian mysticism. If you're just joining me, I'll reiterate that I'm not a scholar or clergy member of any kind. I'm a musician. I have also self-published a book on the inner Christian life, and I've put a link to that beneath. I've been reading the mystics for a long time, lots of years. I read them for their counsel, their encouragement, for the inspiration of their lives, and it's very much a part of my own pursuing of Jesus Christ and wanting to be in their company as I do that. So today I'll talk about these writings as you might also approach them in that practical way, and I've put lots of links and titles and goodies for you beneath. So, as you approach these texts, let it be your appetite for Jesus Christ himself that leads you, that guides you, and ask the Holy Spirit to come and encourage you. Otherwise, it's very easy to begin relating to these texts as just more content, or to be burdened by the idea that you have to read all of a particular book, which of course you don't. So just begin by grazing and nibbling at whatever is helpful. Maybe there'll be a paragraph or idea or an image that stirs you toward God, something that helps you find the place where you meet God, and you want to be able to just stop and digest whatever that is, even if it means you never get beyond the first page. At the same time that you're nibbling along, you do want to read enough of the writer to get a sense of their uniqueness. What makes them distinct? What makes them distinct from other voices of influence in your life? Try to imagine that person talking right to you, right there in the room. A very good place to begin is with the letters of spiritual counsel. These are letters written from the mystics to someone they're guiding along in the spiritual life, often as they're in the role of spiritual director within the Catholic Church. The letters are addressed to different people in their own need and circumstances, so what the writer says will not always be speaking to you, but you'll get a sense of their personality and their wisdom as they're speaking into that variety of situations. The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence would be an example. Brother Lawrence was an unlearned monk from 18th century France. He was renowned for finding great joy in fellowship with God, moment by moment, in whatever he was doing. And he wrote these short, direct letters to various people. I've read them here at the channel. And some editions, including this one, include transcribed conversations between Brother Lawrence and Monsieur Beaufort, his friend, who also put the book together. Another of the best starting places is The Short Method of Prayer by Madame Jean Guyon. Lots of folks will know this through this edition, Experiencing the Depths of Jesus Christ. This is a title that an editor gave it centuries later. This is pretty recent. The book was written in 1685, and it originated as a letter from Guyon, as she was of the aristocracy, to her friends among the common people. It's addressed to the simple and unlearned. She emphasizes that God is accessible to them, not just to the people in religious vocations. And then she goes on to explain in a practical way, a very simple way, how we can draw close to God in prayer and in reading the scriptures. Now, there's come to be a consensus that Madame Guyon was quite eccentric and that she tends to go around in circles about the death to self, and that this can be confusing. And this was my experience also, so I can't easily recommend her books beyond this first one. But if you can read even the opening 3 chapters of this book, you'll know that you've been set on a good, right course, and it's going to be helpful to you. You'll find her as someone who loves the reader very much, and she is very keen on bringing you along toward the treasure that she's found in her intimacy with Christ. Madame Guyon was close friends with Francois Fenelon, and he's another really excellent one to begin with. I've done an introduction on both Guyon and Fenelon here at the channel and read from them also. Now, Fenelon was a very important person in his time. He was an archbishop, a writer, a philosopher, and a political theorist, in addition to his role as spiritual director within the court of Louis XIV. He wrote all sorts of things that were widely read throughout Europe and the colonies, and some of them very likely were read by our founding fathers. Probably not the letters of spiritual counsel, but more of his political works. But all of his works were popular in his day, and many of them, and especially the letters of spiritual counsel, have been handled by many editors and translated many, many times. For instance, I used to have an edition of Fenelon from 18th century America out of Boston. And from what I could deduce from the introduction and the content, it's based on the same source material as this little book, Let Go to Get Peace and Real Joy, which looks like something you could find at Walmart. And this is a very popular translation, and it's very good. It's very helpful. And again, the same source material for this book, which is probably my main favorite, or the one that I've recommended a few times, Talking with God, and this is from Paraclete Press. Translations really do matter when you're reading the mystics. They can make all the difference. So you might look for some of their writing online to get a sense of translations that are available, or you can go to Amazon and look at the sample pages there and see what might work for you. Looking beyond the letters of counsel, we have a broader array of texts. We have treatises, sermons, miscellaneous kinds of things, and lots of these are clustered throughout the medieval era. They sprung up largely as people were seeking a more clearly defined, deeper, more personal life of faith against the backdrop of corrupt clergy. And this dynamic, of course, is what eventually led to the Protestant Reformation and the Counter-Reformation within the Catholic Church. So the mystical treatises are more formal, they're more structured, they're more systematic. Often they were written as handbooks of the spiritual life for novices in the religious vocations, of which there would have been many. Then they became more widespread, then the books became more widespread later. The treatises are a little bit more intimidating, so don't shrink from reading a modernized version. And again, no pressure to read it from the beginning to the end. Ask the Holy Spirit what is useful for you, and then follow your nose. It's helpful to put an index in the back also of places that speak to you. Just put the page number there at the end of the book, and you'll be glad that you did that later on. You can also look for shorter excerpts of writings that have been taken from the treatises or other writings of the mystics, but you do have to be discerning here, because it's very easy for publishers to make fast money putting together a little shimmery book of inspirational quotes without any context, without any solid introduction, and sometimes the whole Christian orientation of the author is sort of forsaken or finessed away, or something like that. I like this little series by Templegate. I found this online. Templegate Publications. If you want to start with something from the Protestant tradition, we don't have letters of counsel, but we do have essays and sermons. These writers, being Protestants, are not as often called Christian mystics, but sometimes they are. And like the other mystics, they don't need to identify themselves as mystics, but they feed us in that same way. They focus centrally on the inner life, on our union with Christ, and they show us the fruit of those inner disciplines that accompany that real experiential knowledge of Jesus, which of course we have among Protestants and Catholics and the Eastern traditions as well of Christianity. So I've read some of these folks also here with introductions. Andrew Murray comes to my mind first. He was a Scottish pastor who served in South Africa. He was deeply influenced by the Anglican clergyman William Law, as were many of these Protestants. Then there are the Americans, A.W. Tozer, G.D. Watson, that's George Douglas Watson. Watson is someone relatively undiscovered, but he's one of my own favorites, and I've read from him here at the channel. I hope to read more of his essays. I'm sure that there were women too among them, probably not as broadly published, and so we don't know who they are. At least I don't know who they were. Other favorites are Frank Laubach, the missionary to the Philippines, who was also a renowned educator, And I love this book called Testament of Devotion by the Quaker Thomas Kelly. And there are many, many more down beneath. You'll see that's a very partial list, but it gives you something to go on. There are also the writings of the early Puritans, in particular, a group of men called the experiential or the affectionate divines. And I'm just discovering these right now, and I'm quite excited. They're so rich. The language can be hard to penetrate, so I've put a link below. I think there may be a few places where you can find modern editions, but go for those. I've just started reading The Glory of Christ by John Owen. I really like it. Finally, there's Dallas Willard. Willard was an American philosopher, theologian, and pastor who died in 2013. So he's quite new on the scene, and we may recall his great treatise, The Divine Conspiracy, which is monumental, and by all means go for that if you want to, and you're up for that. But I like to recommend, for starters, these more pastoral books, more practical. I would recommend first Life Without Lack, Living in the Fullness of Psalm 23. And then secondly, Hearing God, formerly called In Search of Guidance. And for me, these books are just so helpful. They reach into the most practical depths of that inner Christian life, really the mechanics of the inner life as they're centered around Jesus Christ. And as for this book, Life Without Lack, this is not actually a book that Willard technically wrote, but it's a book very well put together by a man named Larry Burkhoft. It's a complete transcription of material from a home group study that Willard taught in the early 90s. And it's very fluid. It feels really like he's talking straight to you. And I did have a friend comment that this book looks a little bit like a Name It, Claim It book. And it does a little bit, but I assure you it's not that. Now, as for Hearing God, this is an earlier book. As I said, it was first called In Search of Guidance. And here, Willard explores the question of whether or not we really can hear from God and have a conversational relationship with him, and whether or not this is an acceptable idea, and why. And it is very thoroughly scripturally based. It does get a little bit heady near the end, but it's very convincing, hard to argue with. Dallas Willard has had a deep personal impact on me, and so I've done a few videos about him here at the channel, and I'll put the links there for that. And that's all for now. So thank you again for listening. And I really appreciate it. I hope that you will click on the like and the subscribe, and I'll return soon. Thank you.